So, good morning everyone. Most of you know me. My name's Sandie Doyle. I'm a hypnotherapist based over in near Southampton, just off of the Whiteley Junction. If anyone's got any questions while I'm going through, if you just save them to the end or pop them in the chat box and I'll come to those at the end and I'll do my best to answer them for you. So first of all, what do? I help people to get over stumbling blocks in their lives that are holding them back. So it might be something simple like a fear or a phobia, it might be anxiety, weight, smoking, nail biting, panic attacks, driving test, exam nerves, all manner of things. Or it might be you're nervous about giving a talk or a presentation. Now, but what I do specialise in is PTSD and trauma and anxiety, which is my passion. So first of all, I'll start with a few myths and questions that I get asked all the time. So first of all, what is hypnotherapy? Well, what it's not like stage hypnosis. I expect most of you have seen some sort of stage hypnosis at some time, whether it was the programme on the television back in the room or whatever. And I often get asked, yeah, but those people, are they really hypnotised or are they just pretending? The answer is yes, they are hypnotised, but what happens is they're set up behind the scenes before they're actually on the television. They've been hypnotised and they've been primed with triggers that will send them back into a deep hypnosis in order to do all the things. But in order to be hypnotised to make a fool of themselves, they have to agree to do that. What hypnotism can't do, hypnosis cannot make you do anything you don't want to do, which is why you often get people say, oh, I had hypnotherapy for smoking and it didn't work. Well, I have got lots of testimonies from people who did give up smoking with hypnotherapy and it does work. But the key is you have to say, do you really want to give up in the first place? Now, I screen a lot of my clients that come to me for smoking and I don't even see them because they fail at the first hurdle. They don't convince me they really want to. It's I should, I need to, the doctor says, my wife, etc. It's not going to work. Sadly, it's not magic. I wish it was. I'd be very rich. Another question is, can anyone be hypnotized? Yes, most people can be hypnotized, except people that have got a very low concentration span or possibly some sort of mental disorder, psychopaths, etc. No. Another question, will I be asleep? No, you won't be asleep. Everyone goes through hypnosis at least twice a day. So in the morning, if you wake up with an alarm, and sometimes you have that luxury of pressing the snooze button and you lay there and you think, oh yeah, just 5 more minutes. And you might hear other people moving about in the house, you might hear a dog or whatever. That is what you're like in hypnosis. It's just deep relaxation. So obviously you're aware of my voice, you'll be aware of other noises in the room. So it's just deeply relaxed. But when you're in this lovely relaxed state, I can bypass the conscious critical mind and work with the subconscious mind to make the changes that we need to make. Now, all our behaviours that we go through every day, all the strategies we use for different things, they're all learned from when we're born. So we start off by learning how to sit up, how to crawl, how to walk. We don't just get up and do these things. We have to learn by repetition. And as you learn to do these things, so you get more proficient at it. But we also, along the way, learn things that aren't useful to us, which is how, for example, phobias start. We're only born with 2 fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Anything else is a learnt behaviour. So a common one, for example, spider phobia. We're not born being frightened of spiders, but if you grow up with a parent or a person in the household that screams every time they see the tiniest spider, you very quickly learn to be frightened of that thing because you're copying who you've learnt it from. Or you can learn a phobia by your own personal experience. So if you're in a situation where maybe you got bitten by a spider or a spider made you jump, that could again produce a fear response, and then that can magnify into a phobia at some point later on. Now, going on to, going back to everything we learn, all these patterns of behaviour, from when we learn to walk, to sit up, and later on we learn to drive. When you learn to drive, you don't just get in a car and do it automatically. You're thinking about the mirror check manoeuvre, you're thinking about where your feet go and everything else, and it's a conscious thing. Whereas when you've been driving for a while, we all know we can drive from A to B sometimes and forget how we even got there. That's because that pattern of learning to drive, that pattern of driving has formed a neural pathway. It's formed a pattern of behaviour that we employ every time we get in the car. We do it automatically. When we brush our hair, clean our teeth, have a drink, anything we do, it's just formed all these millions and millions of neural pathways. And as a hypnotherapist, I work with altering those neural pathways if they're faulty. So in other words, we've learned a pattern of behaviour that's not useful to us anymore. Now, talking about PTSD and trauma, which is what, as I said, my passion, PTSD occurs after a stressful event. It could be an accident, it could be a sexual assault, a physical attack, common after terrorist attacks, natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, etc. And also if you've been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. A lot of people at the moment, I think, out there are suffering from trauma, PTSD type symptoms following COVID. Either they've experienced it themselves, and I've talked about it on here, or they've had relatives or people that have experienced it, or they've lost people to it. And sufferers can re-experience aspects of whatever trauma they've been through. And in order to avoid it, they'll avoid reminders of places, people. Sometimes they suffer with detachment issues. They estrange themselves from other people. Sometimes they're unable to display emotion or loving feelings because of this PTSD going on. And it can be limiting to them in their lives in lots of different ways. It stops them doing all sorts of things. I had a client recently call me about this to do with COVID, had been in hospital over the Christmas period on oxygen, and then subsequently suffering from long COVID. But now he has to go to hospital for routine injections for something not connected with COVID at all. But when he tried to go for his next appointment, found that he just couldn't walk into the building, had a panic attack in the car park because of all the flashbacks of what happened in the hospital came back to him. So he's going to be coming to see me fairly soon. Symptoms of PTSD can be various: difficulty sleeping, irritability, outbursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilance in certain situations, an exaggerated startle response. And they can have physical reactions to events that symbolise the trauma. So, for example, I said that the chap who had the panic attacks, just at the site of the hospital, brought it all back to him what he'd experienced while he'd been in the hospital. And quite often it's our mind that can play tricks on us with that, and bring back things that weren't necessarily real at the time, but were real to them in how they were thinking. For example, with the COVID patient, he'd been in hospital on oxygen, but his mind, he couldn't see any of his family or friends. He was planning his funeral. He was watching other people around him being escalated up to intensive care. He was overhearing doctors and nurses' conversations that maybe he shouldn't have heard, but they all played on this stress response in his brain. Clients often ignore trauma and things like this, thinking that if they just ignore it, it will go away on its own. It doesn't. And quite a common side effect of PTSD, in order to suppress it or to repress these memories, they often turn to something else in order to bury it, i.e. drink, drugs, sex, food, gambling. All these addictions quite often come from some sort of PTSD in the past, which is why we have the sad cases of many veterans of PTSD that live on the streets that have addictions to drink and drugs. It is the only way they can cope with the awful things that are going on in their mind from the things they've suffered when they've been in combat, etc. I think that's basically a very quick whistle-top tour of some of the things I do. Just to give you a couple of examples, quite often as well, our anxiety issues, if we don't deal with them, if we don't talk about them and get them dealt with at source, they will eventually come out in physical responses. And I'll just give you an example of an elderly lady I saw. It was before COVID. And she was in her early 70s and was suffering with all sorts of pain that some days she couldn't get out of bed. It was akin to a fibromyalgia type thing going on, really. And she'd been backwards and forwards to the doctor, asked for various tablets, etc., etc. And in the end, the doctor had said to her, oh, she wanted to have a neurology scan and all sorts. And the doctor eventually said, you need to see a hypnotherapist because there's stuff going on you need to sort out. So she came to me, and to cut a long story short, through hypnosis, it turned out that she had been raped by her father when she was 7. And she had carried this trauma with her into her 70s and had never told a soul about it. And eventually, it had come out on all these physical ailments during later life, until eventually she was almost incapacitated with various pain. So we dealt with that on the first couple of appointments, and she got rid of a lot of the pain, went off and had the holiday that she was hoping to have, called me on a return to come back and see me again because she still had a little bit of this residue pain. She didn't seem to be able to get rid of it, moved around her body sometimes, was in her hand, neck, shoulder, back. Excuse me. And she came back, and again we went into hypnosis, and I worked with the subconscious mind, and I talked to the subconscious mind and said, thank you for all the great work you've already done. However, so-and-so has still got this pain that's moving around her body. Is there something else? Is there another event in her life we need to look at? And it indicates to me yes. When I say it indicates to me, I use what we call an ideomotor response, which I set up at the beginning of the session, where with a finger movement, I get the subconscious mind to take over the finger so that it stays still for a no answer and it moves for a yes answer. That's that bit in a nutshell. And through that, it said, yes, there is something else to look at. And we went back again to this same event with the father raping her, but it turned out that the mother had been present. But can you imagine what sort of trauma that had created in this woman, that not only had her father violated her in such a way, someone that you should be able to trust to give you love and protection, but her mother had actually condoned what was happening. And, so she'd had this double betrayal going on. But it's interesting how it didn't come out on the first event, both of it, because the subconscious mind, its purpose is to protect you. And clearly the subconscious in that case thought, I can't bring out both parts of this thing this trauma that she's buried, because that would have been an awful lot to deal with in one session, in one event, one session, that, not only did her father betray her, but her mother too. So it kind of spread it out over two, sort of come to terms with the first bit, then we'll deal with the second bit. And she dealt with it, got rid of the pain, went back to the doctors, and eventually came off her pain relief. And I had a lovely letter from her afterwards thanking me for what we'd done and the fact that she was now pain-free and enjoying her life again. But it took until she was in her 70s to deal with that. So that's just one example of how your emotional pain can manifest itself in physical pain if you don't deal with it.